A lot of companies, a lot of people say that, can we implement this? Can we, use mobile technologies? But first, you need to understand what are you going to achieve that? What is the business value that you are looking at? What that business value means to your company? Okay, then translate that business value into a business strategy. So it has to be aligned with your business strategy. Whatever technology you are implementing, that needs to be aligned with your business strategy. What is your business strategy? I want to improve my sales. I want to reduce my cost. I want to add more products into the market. I want to see that my, I have happy customers. What exactly, what is your strategy? So accordingly, we have technologies to use, and come up with the solutions around that, right? That is the first factor that any industry, before using artificial intelligence, or to that matter any technology, should be looking at it. The second one is that underpin your AI strategy with data strategy. A lot of companies, if you look at, there is a recent research from Gartner Group. What it says, when Gartner Group spoke to a lot of CIOs and CEOs, and everybody said, we are very keen, we want to do that. 70% of the people, they said they are interested to implement some form of artificial intelligence. Okay, but unfortunately, even 25 to 30% of the people even are not gone ahead with their prototyping. The reason is they're not able to articulate what they're going to get, how they're going to create a value using artificial intelligence, right? And sometimes, they doesn't even know that where do they get the data, what kind of data is required, because the entire algorithms, if you look at it, all count around your data only. So the AI transformation journey starts with data. That is what the second important factor for any industrial artificial intelligence. What data being captured, where I'm going to get it, in what form, in what purpose, how do I create this data, curate this data? There's a huge data is available in the market. Okay, and while searching the data, while analyzing the data itself, there could be a lot of decisions that you may have. So I've seen a lot of customers, they start with some problem statement. When they capture the data and start analyzing the data, create algorithms, they found that there are much more than what they initially thought from the data itself. Okay, the third important point here is, I think this is another important, which is bothering the industry very well, uh, you know uh, 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 very seriously, is that this is the talent point of view. I just want to focus, I just want to give some brief about what is required for the industry. And obviously, because you all come from, you're all the educators, and you are the people, you are the people or institutions giving resources to the industry, right? So that's where I just want to add certain point on the last slide. I would like to discuss that during this entire thing. Okay, now let us talk about a use case. I just want to give right away, want to go into the use case itself. Okay, uh, so this use case is from an FMCG company, a fast moving consumer goods company. With it has a three manufacturing facilities across a large place, like in the USA or in India. Even if you take this example, if you simulate into an Indian context, so three manufacturing facilities in three different states, four major distribution warehouses. That means whatever they're manufacturing in the plant, they are actually sending it to these distribution warehouses, and from there it goes to 20 different delivery centers to be finally delivered to the end customer. End customers are like stores, any of these Vijetas and all these kind of companies. So this is the a problem statement. What they observed over the time, that okay, there is a declining sales, and they don't know why it is happening, what is the problem. So they started looking at, okay, the first point, they started looking at the contributing factors. What are the factors that actually contributing for my declining sales? Okay, so they started looking at this. Okay, is the product range sufficient for the market? We also discussed earlier that customer expectations are also changing. Is customers are expecting more than what I'm producing and selling in the market? Are they expecting different flavors? Are they expecting different sizes of the product? Or is that my pricing is a problem? Is my pricing higher compared to the competitors? Am I pricing higher? Is it a sales channel that, okay, I have a different channel? Basically, these guys will have channels like, e-commerce sites, their own stores, and they also, sell it to some dealers. Okay, all kinds of sales channels are all there. So is the problem is with my sales channel, or is it a competition? I'm trying to drive from a point of an industry, from point of view of an industry, how the problem is being identified, and then what kind of evaluations have happened on the technology front, and what is the final solution that we have arrived. Okay. So after looking at a lot of data and understanding the patterns, everything, of course, we found that the problem is nailed. It's a frequent stockouts at the warehouses or the delivery centers, and it's also a delayed deliveries. So they're not meeting the promises given to the customers. They're not able to deliver. Always they're delivering, in a delayed manner. Okay. So then they identified what are the reasons. So the reasons identified is lack of information or communication delays, lack of collaboration among the stakeholders. So who are all the stakeholders here? The company itself is the FMCG company is itself is a stakeholder. My customers are stakeholders. My suppliers are stakeholders. My transporters are stakeholders. My government agencies are stakeholders. So these are all the stakeholders, different stakeholders. But unfortunately, there is no collaboration. There is no seamless communication happening between all my partners. So that is a major challenge. That is the major reason for not being able to serve my customers, not being able to see that the frequent talkouts are not happening. Okay. And also this other, reason is low technology adoption by business partners, because some of the small shops, they may not be using any technology, any applications, etc. So I don't know when they need this material until unless they call me or they send me a mail or something like that. So the low usage of low technology adoption by some of the business partners, not all the business partners, but some of the business partners. After analyzing all the stuff, they decided that, okay, let's do come up, let us do an integrated application implementation, integrated enterprise system and enterprise intelligence system. So this is the solution they have identified. They don't know, because as an industry doesn't know, because there are a lot of consulting companies who provides all this technology insights to these companies, saying that, okay, you use this, use a machine learning, you can solve the problem, you can use IoT, you can solve the problem. So these are the consulting, obviously that is the role of the consulting organization. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Now what is the solution now? So now we identified that, okay, what is the problem, and the solution we have identified. What solution we have identified is, if you look at the center, supply chain control tower. This is a very an innovative case for artificial intelligence. And of course, small companies may not be able to implement this kind of solutions. Being a large companies, they decided that we will have a supply chain control tower. What does it mean? It means I have my customers and consumers on the other side. I have my distribution center who serve my customers, and the distribution centers are being supplied by the production system. My factories are producing and delivering it to my distribution, and distribution is delivering to my customer. But for my production, I need my suppliers to give me the raw material to me. Okay, so this is the entire thing, which can be controlled from a centralized supply chain control tower. What I am going to control now? The next question is, okay, now I had a very beautiful picture here, what I'm going to control, how I'm going to control this, and what I'm going to achieve out of this entire thing. Okay, now there are two things that they have identified, that we should have a data engine which takes the data, the financial data, the demand data. The demand comes from the customers, right? What customers are using, how much they want. This is the demand data. There is an inventory data. Inventory, I think, all of what is inventory is all about, right? So it is the material that I store for my, if it is a finished product, what are the materials I will be storing, producing and storing. And if it is a raw material, how much I'm actually, ordering and buying from the suppliers and keeping into my inventory. And then manufacturing data, product data, weather data, traffic data. This is an important identification here when you come up with a solution. As if you remember, we have seen the second point is data. If you understand where the data comes from, what first thing is what data I need to analyze, and where do I get the data. Weather data is not my data, right? Okay, I have my financial data. Demand data is again is customer data. I don't know how customer reacts, what customer preferences are, what customer is expecting us. Okay, the manufacturing data, of course, there's a lot of data coming from the machines. We will have another use case. I will talk about that machine data, uh, not, not this artificial intelligence machine, but here it's a physical machine we will be talking about. Traffic data is not my data, but I should know, because that is one of the parameters which is influencing my movement of material from one place to the other. Track and trace data, my transporter, the vehicle, the drivers, everybody's data that I need to make sure that everybody is in sync, and they take the instructions from my supply chain control tower. Okay, next one is, okay, I solve this problem, but what else I'm going to do with this one? The next one is the prescriptive analytics engine. One is a data engine, and the second one is the prescriptive analytics engine. What is that is here is, there are three elements here: the descriptive analytics, predictive analytics, and prescriptive decisions. What happened? Why did it happen? Why did we sell so many products last month? Why do I need this information? I need to understand why suddenly there is a surge in my sales. What happened? Because this has an influence on my algorithms. This has my influence on my machine learning programs that I have prepared it, right? So this is the information that I will be capturing, and also it is giving me predictive projections. So what will happen? Okay, now the last month your sales have been improved. Is it consistency? Is it it is going to be a trend? Is it going to be only a such kind of a thing? So that is where system will tell you whether it will predict whether how big is the demand going to be in next month. Will it be the same demand, or it's less demand, or more demand? The third one is the prescriptive decisions. What are the effects? How can we make it happen? Where should we place inventories in the network in the next month? Now the challenge is, I'm happy that my sales are increasing based on the data. I see that, but how do I distribute my, because you know that this company has 3 manufacturing facilities and 4 major distribution warehouses and 20 different distribution centers. So where do I keep my inventory? Which location, which state is my sales increasing? Which type of customers are buying my products? This is a very intelligent, very data intensive calculations that it does, and it will also prescribe you that this is what you are going to get it. Okay, till now, if you remember, till now I did not talk anything on the technologies. This is the problem statement. I am analyzing, I am dissecting the problem, understanding what could be the possible reasons, understanding what should be done, how I am going to do that, and what I am expecting from the system. This is what is more important for the industry perspective. I'll just take a pause here. Any questions? Please free to ask questions, or if you are not able to understand some of the terminology I'm using it, I'm trying to use all the general terminology, because I always tell my people, if I am actually talking about inventory, I always tell them that okay, more than you, maybe housewives will understand inventory much better. The reason is they manage the kitchen. Kitchen is the major inventory place for you. She knows how much she need in a particular month. Will you buy 100 kgs of tea powder? You will not buy, right? Will you buy 2 kgs of rice? And she knows that how much quantity that that is required for the house, based on the pattern, based on how much you are consuming on a daily basis, and they know that. So that is where I always give examples of what we see on a day-to-day basis. So if you did not understand any of the terminology here, the words I use, please raise your hand. I will clarify that. Are you okay? All of you are okay? I'm not hearing anything. Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, okay. Now the next slide is, I already discussed about it, but again, there is a slide here. What we are doing is, okay, we have identified the problem. We have identified how we want to do that and what we are expecting to do that. Then the next question is, so let us talk about the data. So what data I'm going to get it? How to collect the data? Where to source the data? Where it is available? When I think the weather data, where do I get the weather data? Traffic data, where do I get the traffic data? Okay. What kind of patterns I'm looking at it? The next one is to analyze this data, for example. So what technologies I'm going to use it? Even before this actually technologies, and where I'm going to store this data, because it's going to be a huge data. If you look at some of the industrial data, every 15 minutes or every 5 minutes or every second, if I'm capturing, my machine data, machine temperature or the pressure or anything, this is a huge data I'm going to collect it. So millions of data points I'm going to collect, where I'm going to store it. So I need to identify the technology which can handle this large data for me, which cloud applications, which cloud I should be using it, which services I should be using, what is the performance required, what is the capacity, what platforms are available. So these are all, very important data that I'm looking at it. Then what technologies? Now we are talking about whether it's a machine learning, whether I should IoT to capture this data, or it's a manual. Is it available? Is there any platforms who can sell the data? Okay. So all this information that I need to do, the technologies, the models, the platforms, the algorithms, everything. And again, I also need to see that the processes, if I am implementing this technology, because this is one of the biggest challenge for most of the industry. The challenge is the management takes a decision that I want to implement it, but at the lower level, people don't understand the technology. They don't know, they resist, and they say that, this is, there could be some fear of losing jobs, or people don't even understand how to use the technology. Okay. Even now, we may not be able to use it, maybe people like us, seniors, how to use a mobile phone. But even a 10th class guy now, he can tell you exactly what the maximum utilization or what are the features, facilities available in a mobile phone, right? So you have to identify the processes impacting using this artificial intelligence or using these technologies. And now another challenge people are facing in the industry is when we are introducing technologies, we are introducing robots into the shop floor. How the robots can work with the humans. So that is where they came up with a new word called cobot, collaborative robot. It has to collaborate. It's, you cannot continuously or completely depending on a robot. There should be some interface between a human and the machine, a human and this robot. The role changes. Earlier, I was doing something on the shop floor, but because now the technology has been introduced, my role has changed. So you have to identify where the processes, which processes are going to change because of introduction of these technologies. And the last but not least, this people. So do I have the people who will be involved? Who are all the people going to be using this technology, consuming this technology? Okay. What are the skills? Whether do we need some upskilling to be done and the reskilling has to be done, or should I hire somebody from the market with the skills? All this will questions will come in. So assume that we have done everything now. We identified technology, we identified data, we did everything. Our solution is going to be the result is like this. Can you understand? This is the tower I'm talking about. It's not the tower like a physical tower that we are going to see here. At one single point as a tower, I can see the entire thing, what's happening in my factory, my company, my suppliers, my customers, everything under one umbrella, bringing it. This is all possible using the technologies like artificial intelligence. That is what I mentioned initially, that artificial intelligence, the way the industry is working, is going to work, is changing, right? So a lot of expectations, and even the research organizations, they were all talking about some 30 billions of billions of improvements or uses of this technology is going to be there in the industry. Now coming to this overall result we are talking about, right? So the result is the logistics visibility. Now I am able to, from this tower, I'm able to see suppliers, what is happening at the supplier side, because he's supposed to supply me raw materials, right? And I receive into my warehouse, I do the production, I do my finished products, I send it to my distribution site, and that goes to my customer. If any changes to my customer, so there are cases we see in the industry, customer orders for 5,000 pieces, and suddenly he says, no, I don't want 5,000 pieces, I want 3,000 pieces. So what happened is, because you have already produced based on this confirmation from this one, the entire supply chain fails, because you don't have a visibility what is happening. Today the technology using artificial intelligence, I'm able to capture a lot of information. So use this one. So this is the global visibility is the first thing, and the integrated operation, whatever is happening to my customer, my supplier should be able to understand, know that. Okay, whatever is happening in my warehouse, that should be that should be known to my customer as well as my supplier. The next one is intelligent recommendations, where this a lot of technologies that we use the procurement for, and you're also industry 4.0 we're talking about now, the smart warehousing, where we are using a lot of visualized kind of a thing. Spare parts management, autonomous and B2C logistics, where in my logistics, each and every movement of my truck moving from one location to the other location, it's completely tracked. And this is a very powerful solution that has come up in the industry, particularly for the supply chain management space, the logistics space of it, and which resulted in improved performance of this one. So this is one of the use case I want to present it to you, how artificial intelligence and technology can help in the industry. And now again, one more point I want to make it very, very clear to everyone here is, it need not be one single solution. Okay, the organization is so big and they can invest, they have enough resources to do that. They can come up with even each one, even if you are modernizing your warehouse using some technology, artificial intelligence. Okay, sensors, some sensors, because some of the warehouses that we have used is RFID enabled kind of a thing. So when this inventory comes down, automatically the order is booked, and the supplier will supply this material and fulfill that one. On the production floor, my quality is automatically tested using machine learning programs. My quality improves here. So even I can do individual pieces of the solutions. It need not be a single tower that what I've talked about, right? I gave this example to have a bigger picture where in which areas this technology can be useful for the industry. Okay, any questions? Okay, so next use case I want to do this is the predictive maintenance. How many of you know that predictive maintenance? What is predictive maintenance? Actually, it is unpredictable, predictive thing to predict a maintenance, right? So the predictive maintenance we are talking about is in a large. This is a use case again for a refinery where they have, it's a large refinery. They also have a captive power plant also within the system. They produce their own power. But what they found was that it's a lot of frequent outages and the breakdowns happening in the factory. And do you know what is the loss if even 1 hour shutdown of this kind of a plant? It's a billions of sorry, it's a thousands of dollars that they lose. Okay, if it is frequently happening, so they don't know what is the problem. That's where they took help of artificial intelligence, the machine learning, to identify how do I do predictive maintenance using my artificial intelligence, or particularly the machine learning algorithm. Okay, so here the problem statement is the frequent outages and breakdowns, and the loss of production, loss of revenue, loss of maintenance or cruise time, and non-availability of spare parts, because it's completely unpredictable. Okay, the shutdowns are unpredictable, so they are not able to, sometimes the spare parts are not there. Oh, even though the breakdown is for 1 hour, to get the spare parts I may have to shut it down for some more time also. Okay, and again this same thing, same analysis. What are the possibilities? Why the plant gets shut down frequently? What are the, could be, it could be electrical problem, control systems problem, maybe a crude feed itself is not correct, and that is where it may be creating some problem, clogged pipes and valves, etc., pumps overloading. So these are all various scenarios that we have thought through, and then we came up with a solution where we need to say that we need to use a lot of sensors and identify what is happening in the plant. So each and every equipment, if I'm having some sensors like temperature sensors, pressure sensors, and the flow sensors, because this entire plant is interconnected. If any failure at one line, production line, can stop the entire plant. So I need to understand. At the same time, based on one parameter, I cannot take decisions. Okay, this has to be looked at a very global, point of view. If some parameters is not correct, or it is it is not following the standard expected results, there could be 100 reasons that may be influencing it, right? So I need to understand. So what has been done here is, for each and every equipment has been set with this IoT devices, and as all this IoT data has been put into the cloud, wrote algorithms, lot of algorithms to identify the patterns and the failures, and what is the life of this equipment, how many failures, or how frequently it is failing, what could be the reason. So everything is all done through ML algorithm, and those algorithms actually feeding into their ERP system. So because the enterprise resource planning, EAM, is called enterprise asset management. So a lot of big power plants and refineries, process industries, basically they use EAM applications just to monitor it's not actually monitoring, it is maintenance management application. So computer based maintenance management application, they call it enterprise asset management application. All right. So it gives, it triggers and actually initiates a work order that so and so will go and work and look into that particular the the fitter or whoever electrician, whatever the based on the problem that is been identified, analyzed and detected, the relevant person has to go and work on that one. So because of I'm actually doing a prediction here. That's where there is a predictive maintenance. I am predicting when this machine is going to fail based on certain process data, based on sensor data. Okay. And I'm actually preventing the shutdowns, because I know how much it is going to cost me. If each shutdown is going to cost me a huge amount, I don't want this to happen, right? So I want to proactively identify where is the problem, which machine is going to fail, and for what reason, what is happening. Okay. So this is a second case that I want to present it to you in terms of how effectively machine learning and artificial intelligence is being used. These are the two simple cases, sorry, not simple cases, two other cases that I presented to you. And as I mentioned to you, it is not to be that big thing. Even I've seen a lot of small cases, use cases, where even from a waste, if the waste is moving on the conveyor, we have cameras which can identify a reusable plastic in the waste itself, and it will separate it actually. So it will separate it. It has a loop, active loop there. Some action is being taken. So when the moment it identifies a reusable plastics, it will divert that plastic into a separate bin, and all other waste can go into the other bin. A simple example I'm talking about. Agriculture, there extensively, machine learning is being used. Road traffic, airports, your face recognition. I think face recognition and all these things, technically, they will be talking about. As I mentioned, I'm not going to talk about anything on the technology point of view. Even I don't know even. Okay. But I only know that what industry problems are there. How do I use the technology? I'm a user of a consumer of technology more than anything. Okay. Again, I'll take a pause. Any questions? Even there are a lot of simulations can happen. So one of the use case where we were working on this one is when the car manufacturers has to do a crash testing. So this is really they crash it. Okay. But there is a simulations that has been built. So instead of crashing, you can do 100 crashings without damaging even one vehicle there. But it will give you a lot of data there. Okay, if you come from this side, this is the impact. It comes from that side, this speed, that speed, everything can be simulated. The hundreds of use cases are there in the industry. Okay, now I'm going to the next slide. Yeah, so out of the 3 points that I talked about, the first one is identifying the problem. Second point is identifying which technologies to solve this problem, and data, everything we talked about. The third one we were talking about is the challenges and the talent availability in the market. Now, as a lot of people have a misnorms about this artificial intelligence. So somebody says, I want to be a artificial intelligence. I don't know in which area you want to be an artificial intelligence guy. Because artificial intelligence, we have multiple, as I mentioned, right? So it's a group of technologies we are bringing together. Even that's not technology, we are bringing together to create something which will be useful for the industry. If you look at, maybe in some of the use cases, we have used IoTs, we have used ML, we have used data analytics. Big data analytics we have also used because it has to be hosted on a in a large environment and with the huge processing power, and a lot of application development we may have to do because interfacing these things and building some visualizations, etc. We need to use application development, whether it's a web development or mobile development. And we are also using some of the backbone applications. So these are all like SAP, Oracle, Microsoft Dynamics. These are all the ERP products. So some of you may be knowing that ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning applications, the CRM, Customer Relationship Management application, SCM, Supply Chain Management application, and HCM is Human Capital Management application. This is a group of you know areas they have taken together, like CRM, Customer Relationship Management, starting from your customer service, customer acquisition of a customer, marketing, sales, everything comes into that. So they packaged it together with all the business processes related to these three areas, like your customer sales, marketing, compensations, and all other areas. HCM, your recruitment, your hiring, uh, pay slips generation, payroll processing, everything comes under HCM, Human Capital Management. So these are all integrated applications which are available in the market. So some of the applications that you can see here is SAP, Oracle, JDE, Microsoft Dynamics, Infor. So these are all the various applications, in the ERP space. And these applications again works as a backbone to whatever intelligent things, intelligent decisions, intelligent insights that are being given. But most of the action is being done by these backbone applications. If you say that you need to change the way in the production, that these applications will do that. There's a production order, how much material is being consumed, where this material is all lying there. Everything is under this ERP systems. Okay, here, in addition to this, if you look at what are the technologies that are being there in each of these area. Now, if you're talking about only IoT, we have embedded systems, networking systems, something wireless, RFIDs, Bluetooth, etc. And when it comes to machine learning, programming, and algorithms, we use Python, C++, TensorFlow. Some platforms are there, some programming languages are there. And we have on the big data, we have something, and analytics side and the visualization side, we have Tableau, SAS, all these things are there. So here, these are all various technologies that are required for any organization or any industry. Of course, for a larger industry, we may need all kinds of technologies for developing the solutions. But even smaller applications, there are multiple technologies that are required, that where we are looking at the talent that is available. In addition to that, if you look at there, we are looking for the domain experts, the business process experts, where they can tell how a purchasing process happen, how sales process happen, how the planning in the we have MPAs, master planning scheduling, MRPs, and we have demand planning. So the business analyst is actually looking at how the business operates. Okay, and there are data analysts. There are all various roles and technologies that the industry is looking for at this point in time. Okay, now the question is, are we ready? Because industry is really worried, because they always, if you look at any of the reports globally, they say there is a lack of talent in the latest digital technologies and latest technologies. We talk about artificial intelligence, IoTs, and all this kind of thing. Okay, so this is what I want to touch upon. uh, there are, I just I want to present also that these technologies, there are some platforms already available. Now what happened is this, you must have heard, telling for the last 2 days, this was started in 1950. Before that also, there are a lot of artificial intelligence is there, and activities are happening from 1950 onwards, and more activities are happening in the 2000 period. Okay, the technologies are all now have been commoditized now. So even the algorithms, even the artificial intelligence programs, ML programs, deep learning programs, now they're all available to consume it. So that is where, if you look at a lot of companies, the biggest companies have selected here in terms of the platforms and the engines that are available. So you need not write programs now. If you want to take data from some data, traffic data, you want to analyze something, okay, then it's already there in IBM Watson. If you want to take in engineering data or your distribution data, your logistics data, that's all. Actually, the programs are all there. You have to give the data. You have to again make use of the programs already available. That is where we are calling about the platforms that are available and engines that are available. If you look at IBM Watson, they have been there in the market for long, and they have an open multi-cloud platform. So you can buy this Watson as one, and they have powerful modules, powerful models, and they are also pre-built enterprise applications. I was talking about the predictive maintenance. I was talking about maybe in a bank and in a financial institutions, there are other requirements are there. Okay, some threats are there, so cyber threats are there. So there is some data you want to analyze to see whether there is a threat to my applications here. Okay, some insurance companies, where there was one use case I'll also share with you. Most of us, we know that we drive vehicles, right? We have scooter or car or what kind of thing, and there is an insurance required. Presently, what insurance company says that, okay, is a 5 years old vehicles, okay, this is the premium that you need to pay. But now people started using artificial intelligence to identify the driver patterns in the sense how I drive. Okay, there is an application which sits in your car and observes you. How are you driving your car? How are you taking a turn? How fast your pickup is, how fast it's there, how fast you are driving. Okay, all that, your facial recognition, your movements, your driving patterns, then that data is available with your insurance company. That guy says your driving habits are too bad, so I am actually charging you more, and premium you need to pay this much. And they also started giving some points saying that you are a very neat driver, good driver, very composed driver, then they are giving some discounts to you. See how the entire business has changed now. Are you with me?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So these are all the technology adoptions in the industry. The various, now it is also, when I say it is all commoditized, now you need not even write algorithms. The algorithms are available. You may just buy or subscribe, use it. Sometimes some of these applications are being given free of cost also. So it's free. You because they said this is the platform. You build your own application. When you are building commercial applications, you may have to buy license for that. But otherwise, if you are trying to learn, create some sample POCs, etc., you can use my platforms. That is what is happening in industry. It is completely commoditized now. Okay, they're also giving you the APIs. Okay, application program interfaces. If you have a program, then you can just use that, connect it to that interface program, and you can start using those tools and technologies or the platforms that are available there. For most of the scenarios, and particularly if you ask me the cases, in healthcare industry, heavily being used in the healthcare industry to identify the cancer detection, or even what stage the cancer patient is all about. But they were finding that it is almost 99% accurate. They're able to do that. Even doctors, the humans, cannot do only do up to say 93 to 95% accuracy. Looking at the scans, looking at the whatever the treatment that they give, and the pictures about the malign tumors and all the stuff. Extensively being used into this. Okay, I think these are all the use cases I want to share with you and share my experiences. And yeah, I always uh, make sure that industry gets the right kind of technology, right kind of people to do this and apply these technologies. So I think that's all from my side. So if you have any questions, I would like to answer all the questions to you. If there are no questions, I'm scared. So, what is the next session, sir?
Sir,
Hello.
is it over, sir?
Yeah. So I'm done from my side. So that's why I'm asking any questions from your side and participants.
Sir, being industry people yourself and many industry people, you people will get the data set very easily, sir. But as the academicians or research people, we are facing a
Hmm.
lot of problems for collecting data collection, data set. Uh,
Hmm.
so, what kind of suggestions you will give for get the data for academicians?
No, but if you are using, see, that is where a lot of industries are now discussing uh, the collaboration between academic and the industry is obviously missing, right? So that is you are doing from an academic project point of view, you are doing some projects and you are looking
Okay.
for some data. But if you are solving an industry problem, why can't you work with the industry directly? Because there you will be able to get the right information in the sense, because I'll give you some examples and why that is very, very important. Initially, when we used to go to companies and we used to talk to the senior management, general managers, vice presidents of the companies, and say that, okay, now you implement Oracle, or you implement SAP, you will get this, you will get that, and all the kind of things. Okay, but they look at very different look. They will give it to us because they think that they understand the business more and they know the problem more than an IT guy. Okay,
Okay.
so they always say that, what are you going to tell me now? So because I have been running this business for 30 years, I'm the GM of this plant, I know what is happening in my plant, I know what happens, you know uh, so you are going to tell me that whatever I'm doing is not correct? What are you going to tell me? So that is the kind of response immediately you will get it, until unless you show the value. So as a as an academic, if you come up with a problem statement, you say that, okay, this is the industry problem that I'm going to solve, this is the value I'm going to create, for that I need this, then you go to any of the industry of a relevant industry for which you are actually working on the problem statement, and then you get the data very well, and that is an authenticated data for you.
Okay.
More important, actually we are trying to see, that is one of the motives that we are also having. How do we bring industry and academia together? This is happening across India, across the world, that what kind of interactions that industry and academia should have.
Okay.
Otherwise, you may get some data, but that may not be a relevant data, that may not give you the right results also.
Yes.
You are
So
not involving the right people into the data set.
So if you take a healthcare industry, there most of the hospitals are not like to give the data to the research people for their
Yeah, because it's a patient data, because it's not the hospital that can give the data, because the hospital also has an obligation with their patients that they will not share any patient data. If you know that these pharmaceutical companies, when they bring, even for corona for example, okay, if they're coming up with a medicine, will it be available just like that? Because there are a lot of hundreds and hundreds of clinical research and there are a lot of data that is being collected to validate that this works, right? And there,
Yes, sir.
for a clinical research point of view, they take an agreement with the participants, whoever it is, because when the chemical or when it pharmaceutical, a tablet or a capsule, it has to come out into the commercial market. You need to do a lot of research. You need to do a lot of clinical trials that needs to be done. For that, they actually take samples from this one. So there, the patients will give their acceptance, saying that they can be used as, of course, whether it is happening in India or other parts of the world, that's a different case altogether. But this is the process that they need to take a you know agreement from the patient, the participant, that I am subjected to this particular clinical trial, and I'm accepting to be part of or be a subject of this particular clinical trials. Then only you will be able to do that. So hospitals will not give you until unless, because there are certain hospitals, they have already had some arrangement, like Infosys has been working with some hospitals to create some clinical trials, and also this using machine learning algorithms, and some diseases like cancer is one of the biggest thing. The
Yes, sir.
another one is like sugar patients have that retinopathy. So that is one of the use cases. They are using Sarojini Devi Hospital or something like that. So if the hospital agrees and the patients agree to share the data in a confidential manner for the research and to find some better ways of diagnosing and better ways of treatment, then obviously they will give. But yeah, it is not a freely available data. That is what, because one way we are all saying that data protection is an important thing. No data should be shared without the consent of the people that are involved, right? So those challenges will be there.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your valuable suggestions.
Any more questions?
Any questions, participants?
Okay, thank you very
Okay.
much. Thank you very much for the opportunity given to me. I thank once again Lendi College management and the faculty for involving us as advisory, as part of this one. So hope I shared, because as I said, I can't teach teachers, so I'm just
Yes.
taking that word. Uh, and I try to share my experiences from the industry, because I have been more into industry. I understand the industry pain points and what we are looking at the technology itself, because we are the problem creators, and I think the other guys are problem solvers. And of course they create solutions and we consume the solutions. So from an industry point of view, yeah, this challenge of the skills and availability of the right skills is where we are working as a company, and also with some of the institutions, that we come up with the solutions, identifying what is that we can do to bridge this gap in terms of because this orientation, understanding of the technology, understanding what industry is expecting from the supply side. So we call it, I always use my supply chain demand kind of a thing. So the demand is there. It's not that demand is not there. Demand is there, but the supply is not ready. That is what the industry feels. Okay, so that's where we need to bridge the gap. We have to, we all have a responsibility to make sure that the guys coming out of the colleges have enough knowledge and employable knowledge to be getting into these new areas and upcoming technology areas. That's what I want to tell you.
Thank you, sir. Such a valuable information and source, sir. Uh, Again, I would like to thank you for your uh, talk to our Mendi College FDP, sir. Once again, we would like to touch with you for future FDPs or future programs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Best of luck for the next session. I think Ashwant is already
Yes, sir.
waiting.
So, yes, sir. I request Ashwant Garu proceed with the next session.
Okay. Can everyone see my screen and hear me?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Okay.
Yes.
Again, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back again. This is the last section, the last segment for the 3-day program. So hope you're all, ready to wrap this up and, continue with the rest of the evening. So we will have it at a, it's today's session. The last session would be more about, a use case that we said we will cover. We have two use cases. One is a facial recognition use case and the other is a robotics use case. So we will get into them, without wasting any more time. So before we get into them, one small, a review of what we have already done. So what did we cover in the last 2 days and, first half of today? One most important takeaway has been that AI is already here. It is the present. It is something that we are already immersed in. We are using it on a daily basis through all the various applications, be it Gmail, be it your Outlook, emails. Your smartphone is already embedded with a lot of AI. It's almost like a hash table, as one of the AI scientists says. You don't really think about, using a hash table in your program. Just like that, when you have AI across all these systems, you're not really conscious about it. Your credit card usage, your internet banking, there are AI aspects that are embedded all through. So it is pretty much like the present. The second thing is deep learning is the real AI in terms of where we imagine AI changing the world. That's where deep learning is, which is the core of the AI umbrella, right? We have seen the the Venn diagram wherein you have AI, within AI you have machine learning, within machine learning you have deep learning as the very core of it, and that's where much of facial recognition, much of the advanced stuff that we look at and we relate to AI actually is working. This is also the most ripe area when it comes to institutional research. A lot of publications that are happening in this space, a lot of opportunities that are present here, and this can be the focus of your institution if it wants to get into research in AI. The third thing is machine learning algorithms that Prahalya covered yesterday. It was a broad overview of what kind of algorithms, what is the terminology that machine learning generally uses, what each of them means, what are its, a very conceptual understanding of what it means without going into the mathematics of it. Then we have looked at how chatbots and NLP works yesterday. We went into the implementation of it. We've figured out that knowledge graph is one of the backbones of it. That's the same thing that is used in natural language processing. That is the one that is used in the NLTK, the natural language toolkit. We went through the 10 steps in building a chatbot. This is something that your faculty members or a student can actually pick it up and start looking at it using a bunch of libraries that are already pre-done in Python. They can recreate the entire chatbot flow. So that's what we have covered yesterday. We ended yesterday with a discussion on what Advisely is doing and how it's using artificial intelligence in learning. So with that, we closed yesterday's session. Y.S. Rao sir very aptly covered the first half today, giving a very broad overview of whether to use AI as a tool to solve problems or not. It should never be that because you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. It has to be observed. A problem has to be taken. It has to be understood. It has to be modeled. And then if AI is the real tool to solve it, then you pick up AI. If there are other opportunities, if there are other methodologies in which you can solve them, you should definitely go to it and not use AI directly. So here we are entering the application of AI in facial recognition. As usual, we'll start with a video. Let's see if the video is visible and audible. Can you see this? Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
You started to wonder, what would shopping look like if you could walk into a store, grab what you want, and just go? What if we could weave the most advanced machine learning, computer vision, and AI into the very fabric of a store, so you never have to wait in line?
Excuse me, sir.
Sir, is
video-
it video, sir? Is
The
it
video
video,
is
sir?
not coming up.
Okay,
It's
let
not-
me change that. Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Nice. No
Yes,
check.
sir.
4 years ago, we
Sir,
started
please increase the volume if possible.
learning. 4 years ago, I wonder, what would shopping look like if you could walk into a store?
Sir, volume is not coming.
We are back in the presentation. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
awesome. So the answer is already on the on my slide, but just think about how that video worked, right? So here is a store that Amazon has worked on, where people can just walk into a grocery store, pick up whatever they want, and they just walk out. There is no billing. There is no cashiers who are counting your money. Nothing. It's just straightforward. You go in, you pick up what you want, and then you walk out, right? So there are a bunch of technologies that are working together to make this happen. One of the most important thing that is at play is identifying who's the person who's coming and picking these things up. So that's where computer vision gets into picture. That's where you are looking at the person who's entering the store. What is he looking at? Where is his live location when he is in the store? What is he evaluating? What is that person picking up? And once he leaves, whatever he has picked up or he or she picked up, you bill it and then debit it from their credit card, bill it on their credit card. That's what the system is. So here there are three major technologies that they use. First is computer vision, which is identifying what are the objects that got picked up and who is the person who is picking it up. The second is sensor fusion, where you are looking at multiple cameras, right? They'll probably have 50 cameras that are across the store. It's a small store in Seattle. And then you are scanning each and every movement of object, each and every person there. And you still have to combine all these feeds from about 50 cameras into one single transaction. You have to remember that there is only one person in the store. Just because there are 20 cameras that are capturing one person, it doesn't mean that there are 20 people. So multiple cameras looking at and scanning an entire area would still require a fusion technology, which aggregates these signals, makes them into one signal, and identifies what is that person picking up and who is that person. Two combinations: who is that person and what all is that person picking up. And the third thing is deep learning, which means you have an algorithm that basically figures out without any sensors in the shelves. There is no sensor which says, okay, one item has been picked up. There are no weight sensors. Weight sensor was an old technology. RFIDs is another technology where you're tracking a particular object through space because it's reflecting of radio waves. There is no RFIDs here. It's pure vision. It's only being tracked by a bunch of cameras that are placed in the store effectively, and it's being brought together and figured out what is that person taking and where is that person going with it. So this is a classic case of face recognition technology being used in industry. This is in a state where Amazon is planning on expanding it across much of their their retail stores. That's next part of their business plan, going into retail. And they don't want to actually invest in a lot of humans, training human beings, getting them to adhere to 8 to 8 shifts and things like that. They want it to be completely automated. That's the plan that they're going ahead with. So no lines and no checkout is what their motto is, and they're using pretty good technology and pretty advanced research to make this happen. Now, in many, like we spoke yesterday, in many of AI implementations in industry, the core of it is basically one specific technology. And with that technology, you bring a bunch of things together. So in this example, something that is not really spoken about is there is no cash in this system, right? So it's a cashless system. Having a paperless transaction and a cashless system would have been a big thing 10 years back. But now it's not even in the list of technologies that we talk here, because that's taken for granted. So anybody who's entering the store, you assume that they have a smartphone, you assume that they have a credit card, they're already using digital money. So digital wallets, digital money, having a smartphone are all considered to be prerequisites in today's world. So the object that is still at a very evolving state where a fast evolution is happening, but still it is the crux of this kind of a disruption, is in facial recognition. And that's what we are going to talk about in this in the next few slides. So I have another example on application of AI in facial recognition and in the next layer of facial recognition, which is emotion, right? So once the technology is there to figure out, all right, so here is Yashwant who's on the screen. Once you have that kind of a technology in place, the second layer obviously is whether he is angry, whether he is happy, what kind of emotion he is undergoing. Now in this the emotion research lab, the example that we are showing here, there are 6 emotions that the computer captures in real time. So I'll send you, because I think video is going to bring us back and forth. There's a lot of disturbance there. We will stick to just the slide. So this, what it shows here is that there are 6 emotions that lady who is eating ice cream is being evaluated on. One is happy, the other is surprised, then you have angry, disgust, afraid, and sad. So across all these 6 fundamental emotions, they are combining with secondary emotions, and it almost are 101 secondary emotions that they have come together with, that they have brought out with. And they are constantly evaluating whether that person is happy, sad, surprised, what kind of emotions that they are going through, right? So this is one, I'll just turn off this. Okay. So this is a classic utility or usage of facial recognition, which is at a next level where emotions are also being looked at. We will not go into the emotion part, but we will understand how the facial recognition part happens. So the application of facial recognition, like I said, it's one of the key aspects. We can, once you figure out how to do facial recognition, it can be used in healthcare. It can be used in government, which is in public distribution system. Essentially, the identity piece of things. Once you know that there is an individual human being, then you know who that person is with high accuracy. You can technically give him a lot of services without actually asking him to carry a card or asking him to carry a PAN card or an Aadhaar card, nothing like that. You can directly give him a service, right? So the utilities and the implementations are well known and they're extensive. So let's go to the implementation part of it. This is where, again, it won't be as detailed as where we went yesterday. We don't have code here, but just try to understand how a human face is recognized in a computer, how AI is being implemented in this. Again, most of this, you don't have to code, you don't have to use, you don't have to understand the exact algorithm. there are libraries that are available in Python. The most popular library, if you have to do any kind of computer vision experiments, computer vision projects, is OpenCV. OpenCV stands for Open Computer Vision, right? So all the packages that are required to do facial recognition and computer vision related projects, you can find in OpenCV. And you have PyCam, which is, the data capturing part of OpenCV. So here is the rough implementation details. So I will just take you through how this happens in 3 steps, right? So the first step is face detection and data gathering. The second step is train the recognizer. The third thing is the face recognition. That's the main step. So in the first step, when you talk about face detection, it is basically identifying where the face is, right? So in this example, like you see, if you have a face that is entered and it's processed into the OpenCV library, it looks at in the frame that you have, which is a 480 by 640 pixel picture, you exactly identify where the face is. And it identifies it with 4 coordinates. One is your XY coordinate, the point from where the face begins, and then you have the height and width. So that is the box which the program focuses on. So the first step for any image recognition problem is to exactly identify where the face is. That's the blue rectangle that you see, right? So this is step 1. And this is where you again have a function which directly picks up the face in any photograph that you pass it as a variable. The second part is where you have a bunch of photographs that you give the program to analyze and create a data set out of it. This is the data gathering step. So if you want to build a image recognition software that has my face in the library, in the library, then you have to give 100 pictures of me that are across Facebook or across Instagram, and then load it for the program to start figuring out how to detect my face in the future. So the first step would be data gathering. It's you can get pictures out of the out of your social media profiles, your own pictures, and it basically takes a bunch of features out of it. And this is for the data gathering step for the recognizer to initialize. So the next step is where you process all this data and you give it for the recognizer, or you make the training aspect. So training is when you give it a bunch of pictures, you load it into the program, and it creates what is called as a YML file. And that's where all the information about what are the features that you have to look for in a new photograph will emerge by the AI algorithm. So if you look at the flow chart here, so you have data set, which is a lot of photographs of multiple photographs of the same entity. So you have an ID. This is one single person, and you have a lot of photographs of that person. Similarly, you can have the ID2, which is a second photograph of multiple pictures of the same person. And then the recognizer trains its model, right? That's where the model gets generated, and the output is the trainer.yml file. This is the file that captures all the information on what are the features that you need to look for when a new photograph is given back, right? So what is this trainer.yml, right? So essentially it's what we call as a feature histogram, which means when the model learns about a certain face, it doesn't really understand each and every pixel information in that particular photograph. It's not at like a mask comparison where you are not looking at X and you are not looking at Y, and you're not trying to establish an X equal to Y kind of a process here. You are trying to see what are the elements of X that I can capture. So in this example, we use what is called as an LBP protocol. It's local binary patterns, which is you break down the image into 256 cells. So it's 16 by 16 kind of a breakdown. And out of these 16 by 16, you figure out what is the contrast in each and every one of these cells. So each cell again is stored in terms of the contrast variables, which is how much of light is falling on it, what is the what is the pattern of light that is falling on it. And that once you have these 256 cells stored together, that becomes a histogram. And such 256 cells, you have multiple pictures of it, so it creates an average histogram out of all these images, and more the number of images, better is the average, right? So this is how the feature histogram is created for every ID that you see here. So for every person photographs that you're putting in, the histogram is created for each one of them, and that's what is stored in the trainer.yml file. The next step is, once you have this project live, you have the recognizer.predict function where you can see this GIF that we have put in here. Once you have an image that is in either live, you have a video feed, it starts looking at, first recognizes the box. The box is where you are trying to figure out where the face is. And then it is starting to compare with the IDs that you have in your system. And once you have a match with the histogram that is being picked up from the video, with what you have in the database and with what you have in the trainer.yml file, it is going to show that face with a reasonable level of accuracy. Can you see the number which is beneath the box? It keeps moving from 50%, 60%, right? So that's the probability of match that the system throws at once you initialize it and once you start looking at it. So that number, the idea is to make that number more and more accurate. That's where your tuning comes into picture. Notice that number changing once the frame comes and covers his face. From a 60-70% accuracy, it drops down to 35 to 40% accuracy. Do you guys notice that it dropped to 40% accuracy? Right? So that is how OpenCV works. Again, this is it depends on the number of images that you put in, right? So the accuracy you can improve fundamentally by having more number of pictures being utilized for the recognizer to predict. The more number of images, the more number of angles that you have a particular ID for a particular student or for a particular subject, then the trainer.yml file gets more accurate and you will have better accuracy in your final output. There's a question from, it says HWLLDH. I don't know if it's the college name, but he asks a question, he or she asks a question that says, sir, when using OpenCV for implementing face recognition for attendance system, it's not detecting when encountered with different angle of a face. That's a known issue of OpenCV when you are using this function, this particular function. Histograms, what happens is, obviously there are two steps in when you're computing histogram, right? One is that it only takes grayscales. It doesn't take colored images when it is training. It always converts it into a grayscale and then processes that image for the histogram. When the input data, I don't know how many pictures are you taking in the input, but if you don't have more than 25 pictures in different angles for the OpenCV library, the accuracy is known to be very, 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 very low. And you'll be surprised the kind of errors that comes in, especially if it's not trained enough across a bunch of students, across various different categories of students. In India, the concept of in US especially, you have white men as the highest segment or largest number of data points for the models to run. But when it comes to black people, the black population there in the US, the accuracy levels are significantly down. So there is this famous case. I don't know if you heard about it. In Google Photos, there is a function that tags people and says this is the person's name. And there was a research publication that they have done on a module that said you can use this to figure out what is the person's name. It so happened that some of the black men photos that were part of the research, they were actually marked as a chimpanzee. So the accuracy levels are so bad when it comes to not having enough input data. When it comes to the US population, 80% of the images that Google used to train their models were actually white male, but very few people were actually black population and other races like Asian races. So their accuracy numbers, while overall was good, about 90%, when it comes to certain buckets of people or certain sections of people, the accuracy was horrible. right? And it actually took 3 years for Google to fix it, and the fix I think came out just about few months back. 2019 and December 2019 was probably when they fixed the issue. So it all basically depends on the input variables, especially if you are using open libraries to do your image recognition work or facial recognition work. So be one very easy component for if your students are doing a project or if you are working on a project, ensure that you have as much data as possible, good resolution pictures, you put it into the training model, and then you run it, give it enough time, then your output should be fairly okay, right? So that is what I would answer, sir, for your question. Any questions on this? So I'll go to the next part, which is just a slight, better way that Apple has done when it comes to face recognition. So I'm sure, I think the Apple phone, the iPhone version 8 or X, I'm not sure, but one of the versions has face recognition to unlock their phones, right? So Apple has introduced that feature very recently. It was a little slow when compared to other applications. Microsoft had it in their laptops way earlier than Apple did it. But what Apple managed to do is that they had a very high accuracy and they required very, very little computation power so that it can be run directly on their phone, right? Even if the phone doesn't have internet, it still runs, it gets activated in face detection. We can use the detection to unlock the phone. Sneha asks a question: can't we process the data using MATLAB? Well, if there is a function in MATLAB that does histograms and facial features, feature histograms, then definitely we can use Python, MATLAB, R. All these things are excellent tools for doing face recognition as well. The ability of Python is that it does it at much faster pace because it's at a very core level. Much of the production systems when it comes to facial recognition actually runs on C++ because C++ is much faster than Python because it runs closer to the machine level. And once you have a better program that you have executed, your training will get superbly faster. For the applications that we are looking at, where probably the input sets are in thousands, if not in millions, if you are in thousands, then I think MATLAB works and Python works pretty well. So that's my answer, Sneha Garu. So coming back to what Apple has done, instead of creating a histogram, what Apple has done is what you call as a deep convolutional network. So generally, any convolutional network, or CNN as it's also called, you might be hearing that word commonly. It basically figures out where the edge is, and once you have the edge clearly marked out, that's where you know that it's not just a box anymore, right? So in the previous slide where we were always looking at a box, right? So in a convolutional neural network or CNN, what Apple is using, you would have the face completely marked out. You would not have a box, but it would be exactly the face dimensions that you're looking at. So any kind of background noise, anything that is moving in the background, all these things are filtered out once you move away from a box kind of a system to a more outline kind of a system. And on top of it, what it does is it takes this picture and breaks it down into multiple resolutions. So from the smallest size, instead of taking a 256, like I said, the 16 by 16 matrix, right, for creating a feature histogram, it basically starts all the way from 256 to 1280 or 16 by 16 to almost 16 times 16 different resolutions. It is what it looks at. So starting from the broadest resolution to the best resolution possible, it does image recognition at all these levels and then converts them into one final entity. So what it gives is, at one of these stages, the best match is acquired, and that's where the match happens, even if there is a lot of noise in the system, which means that if there is a background interference, there is something moving in the background, you're on the street and the light is not enough, right? Any of these cases, it will still work very well in iPhone 10 and the latest iPhone applications that you see. Face recognition still works because of this deep learning technique that they have used. So the last part is I mean, whenever people talk about facial recognition, I think the conversation doesn't end without at least spending few minutes on the ethical side of facial recognition. Like I said, the most cutting edge research that is happening today is how to avoid bias in facial recognition. While facial recognition as a technology, as a theory, is pretty advanced already, it is creating a lot of privacy issues in the world. Starting from Chinese, they have completely misused the application in figuring out, if somebody it's an authoritative regime, right? So identifying faces is going to give them a lot of power over their population. If somebody is breaking even the smallest of rules, they can quickly take them into custody and um, you know start tracking them down. It's also been a privacy violation. There's a famous app called Find My Face in Russia, where you have an app, and if somebody is in a cafe and you see that person, you can take a picture, and that app basically runs through all the pictures of that person in social media and figures out what that person's name is, what that person's phone number is, where that person lives. So in wrong hands, such tools are of massive impact if not dealt with properly, if there are not enough safeguards and guide rails. It can be very fatal for the population. So a lot of governments, a lot of AI bodies are trying to figure out how to make appropriate use of this. Government regulations are still not in place when it comes to facial recognition. There is technically no policy with, at least government of India doesn't have a policy on this, right? So how much of privacy violations are happening when you have facial recognition? Imagine you go into a store to buy groceries. If you are somebody who is a regular buyer, and if you're spending a lot of money, then you would be treated at a very substantially higher important customer than somebody who is coming there for the first time, right? How would you feel when such a bias comes into picture, how such kind of a segregation comes into picture? So these kind of things are still being dealt with. There's a lot of bias that comes from the data that you are processing. So adults get identified with facial recognition better than youngsters. Certain majority populations get identified better than non-majority minority populations. So there are different kinds of angles that, especially in the US, they are facing a lot of problems with this. There's black protest that is happening in the US as we talk about, right? And there is a lot of misuse that government agencies have been known to be doing with facial recognition systems. There are cases in the US where they were trying to acquit a person for a crime that he has done just by looking at computer generated pictures and facial recognition information from there. And the court has said that a human has to identify whether that person is a criminal or not. A computer telling that, all right, this is the guy who has done this crime, cannot be taken even with all the statistics, everything that is in place. So in an ideal world, I think looking at facial recognition, there is still a lot of area to cover. If any one of you is looking at doing this, there are a lot of opportunities in India, a lot of opportunities across the world, for anything in terms of how do you identify deep fakes, how do you understand and differentiate. And if somebody says that I don't want to be a participant of facial recognition, how do you not store their information within your systems? What kind of policies you have to be having in terms of effectively implementing facial recognition systems? So this is an extremely ripe area if some of you want to work in. Definitely a lot of hackathon projects can come out of facial recognition, as long as you figure out an effective way of getting the input data, a lot of photographs into picture, and you find a nice use case to make this happen. It will be I mean, the opportunities are just humongous. Any questions on facial recognition and what we have spoken till now? Okay, Karthik G has asked a question: how items are identified? You mean what? What do you mean by items? Any particular domain? You can unmute yourself, sir. We have time today, so we can discuss this in more detail. So the question is how items are identified, like soaps, pulses, etc. in shopping. Um, okay, in camera. Okay, so I am not understanding the use case, but if you are talking about okay, human faces are easier to recognize because there is a lot of similarity and a lot of patterns there. When it comes to soaps and pulses, you actually don't require a facial recognition algorithm and so much of complexity. You have the name of the soap, you have a lot of other attributes. As you said, they can go without paying. Yeah, so images of objects are pretty easy, right? You have the name of what the soap name is, what a label of what that information is. So it's basically character recognition that is in place. So once you identified what is that object that you are picking up from, the shelf from where it is being picked up, you can quickly figure out that this is the price of that object from your database. You know what is the is SKU of that particular object, and you can immediately do it. Identifying faces is a much tougher problem than identifying items like soaps and pulses, because you have a label on it. Humans don't have obviously they don't have a label on them. So figuring out who that person is becomes a much tougher problem. Facial recognition is used in theft management scenario. What are the major challenges faced by developers when they are going to develop applications? Facial recognition is used in theft management in this scenario. What are the major challenges faced by developers? Well, access to the data, right? So if you are talking about theft management, wherein you have a CC camera and you want that person to be identified in live, who that person is, the problem is how do you access that person's photographs? Where does all that information come from? So the government of, the government of Telangana is probably has already started doing this. In US, the federal government does something where it scans all the license photographs, because driving license will definitely have a photograph in them. It looks at those photographs to figure out if there is a theft or if there is a crime that has been committed. That is the first database with which it is cross-verified. And the best part is each state has its own road transport authority, right? Even in India, we have each state controlling road transport as well as the law enforcement on in that particular state. So Telangana will have its own police force. AP will have their own police force. They are all recruited from the same, their individual public service commissions. So they have access to photographs from driving licenses, and they have the police can take that access because they're from the same state. So generally the only photograph that they compare with is the driving license photos, and we all know the clarity and goodness of the driving license photos, right? So for the system to work, it has to be a lot of photographs. With one photograph it gets really difficult, and that's the reason most of the outputs that come out of the systems are pretty bad. In this corona time, how can a face be identified with a mask? Sorry if it's funky. Any clues? No, it's not funky. Actually, you have what you call as a you can break the image and say that a particular, if you have you're basically figuring out the histogram, right? So think about it in a way where you have the whole face, and then you are checking whether half the face is covered with a protective layer, right? So it has to be of the same uniform color. So imagine a histogram where this is where I think a blackboard would have made more sense. But imagine that you have a face that is stored in a particular histogram, and now you are checking whether half of that is basically wiped out. It's of the same intensity. So it's a simple function where you write that, okay, half my histogram of this 256 points that we are looking at, half of it, which is 128, needs to be of the same thickness or same strength, right? That strength could be plus or minus 10%, and I still call it the same strength. And if it's covered by half, I would say that it is a green when it comes to having a mask. So it typically goes like, you have the face, and even if you put your half the face is covered with a book, it still marks it out as having a mask, right? These are some of the ways you can test out these models. Once you write them, try checking this out. If you don't have to wear a kerchief and then put it exactly like this. Most systems are not that sophisticated. What it basically looks is it a half face or not? If the image is being captured with only half face, it calls it, yes, we are using a mask. So on LinkedIn, it is very common that you see images and people keep showing these videos where they have a mask that they put on, and then it shows as a green box. If you remove the mask, it shows as a red box. They are simply one particular use case of the simple method. So with the same processes that we have used in the presentation that we have covered, you have one more step where if half face is being covered in your program, then you can quickly figure out whether that there is a mask that a student is wearing or not, whether the subject is wearing a mask or not. Good. So Madhuri Reddy, ma'am, sir, when related to cognitive systems and I want to work on it, how do you do data acquisition relating to a particular project like heart rate monitoring? All right. So this was also a question that most people have. Figuring out data is a big problem, right? So there are a bunch of sources. I have a list of all the sources from which you can get this information. Heart rate monitoring, there would be a data set in the list that I've provided, so you can pick up data sets from there and start working on them. So I will move on to one more project before you keep asking your questions. We have 10 more minutes, actually 7 more minutes, but just to give you a quick overview, we had applications of AI and robotics also that we wanted to touch upon. This is a little, far more advanced subject. It uses something. So the problem is, how do you make a single arm robot solve a Rubik's cube, right? So solving Rubik's cube with a robot hand is what this project is about. And the difficulties the challenges that this kind of a project are immense. So one of the researchers back in the day, almost 10 years back when this problem was being discussed, they said for a robotic hand to be able to solve a Rubik's cube with a single hand would take about 1,000 years of training, right? That's the amount of simulations that it had to be run before the robot understands, before the robot figures out how to solve this a Rubik's cube with single hand. If you really think about it, right, the complexities that are involved in a actual human hand solving Rubik's are a lot. You have to understand the friction between your hand and the Rubik's cube. Suppose you have oil on your hand, you couldn't be solving a Rubik's cube as easily as you would if you didn't have oil on your hand. The robot also has to figure out how much of friction exists on the particular, with a particular Rubik's cube. It has to figure out what face is facing upwards. So you need to definitely have cameras. You need to have vision that is looking at what colors are there in which section, and how do you keep what should be the strategy in getting to the final configuration. The next important distinction is you need to be sure of what the algorithm is. So that's where the algorithm piece comes in. After you have the algorithm, the biggest challenge is you have to be able to rotate the cube with one hand. That's a very, very dexterous thing, and you cannot slip. If it falls down, it's fallen down, and you lost the competition, right? So there are a bunch of things that get into it. Two important states or tasks that the robot needs to figure out is how do you turn the Rubik's cube with a single hand, And how do you turn one of the layers in this Rubik's cube? That's the second more complicated action or a task that it needs to do. Well, it wasn't 1,000 years since they started doing this, but within 3 years, I think they figured out how to do it. The last 1 year has been a tremendous growth for them. They have used something called as ADR, which is uh, which is uh, which is automatic domain randomization, where given one scenario, it kind of brings in a lot of noise into that problem to make it 10x more, to make the robot learn 10x more from it. Right? So this is one of the most advanced, I mean, this is an advanced technique. All these are techniques, right? The core of it is pretty simple, but how do you put things together? How do you put the pieces of the puzzle together is what differentiates a good AI scientist from the others. So they have been able to do it. They've had a lot of innovations in putting sensors into the Rubik's cube to figure out which side is facing upwards. To put a circuit here, the circuit here is basically ensures that the face that you are rotating is always flat. The 6 sides are in the right position, because if there is even a small portion that is upside down or away from the normal, there is a chance that it breaks the Rubik's cube. So they've built a lot of things. It's called a Geiger cube, which is built with sensors and Bluetooth module inside. There are 3 cameras that are looking at this Rubik's cube, and they have used something called as a Koissenberg's algorithm, which is how do you solve the Rubik's cube with a single hand. So what are the steps that you need to take in solving a Rubik's cube is figured out, and then the robot goes ahead and starts solving it. So this has been a very probably like the most advanced challenge that somebody has worked on when it comes to robotic hands. And this is one step closer to creating a generic robot hand, which is probably like the general AI that everybody is looking at. So imagine this to be one of the initial steps before you could have a robot that can wash dishes, right? Then you don't have to wash dishes at all. Imagine this to be one of the initial steps when you want a robotic hand to iron clothes. Imagine this to be one of the initial steps when you think of a robot assembling cell phones in the future, assembling electronic gadgets in the future. So once you have such a technology that is such an artificial intelligent being mastered with the algorithms that are mastered, then you would really have a world where much of the labor work that we think of today can be solved, right? Today, what robots do are extremely specific. You have to program as to what it needs to do. If you want a robot to assemble a car, it has to be given very specific functions. All right, this arm of robot is going to fix screws and make the axle ready, right? Or fit the wheel or fit the tire to the axle. Those are very specific. All the coordinates have to be extremely right. There are cameras, but they don't have a lot of degrees of freedom. You just keep doing the same mechanical thing again and again. But when it comes to very dexterous things like, I mean, it's very simple, right? Washing utensils shouldn't be so hard for a robot to do, but unfortunately it is. You have different shapes. You have soap falling all over it. The friction is constantly changing. You have water that is spilling all over the place. How do you, with an objective, make a robot understand what it needs to clean, what it needs to wash, and with the highest level of cleanliness? Doing something like that is really a problem that Boston Dynamics and Google's and the best companies in AI are working on today. The simplified version of that problem is probably having a single hand robot working on a Rubik's cube. But even with that, the amount of ancillary sensors, the amount of additional work that they have put in is immense. Without that, they wouldn't have probably solved it yet. But we are going in the direction. We are going in a direction where a general AI based robotic hand is possible. And once that becomes a reality, you can imagine the world changing at a very, very fast pace. So this is a small demo of how it's been able to do it, just for you to get a sense of the various steps that it has. it has to figure out exactly which face has to come up, because it can only rotate the top face whenever it is rotating. So it moves it, it keeps flipping it, and then it rotates the single layer. So here is a rotation aspect. Look at how the fingers are trying to work the top layer. See, right? So that's the struggle it has to go through every time, and it took them hours and hours of simulations with different kinds of gloves, and they've started giving it a lot of tough time to make this to master this act of rotating. Check this out again. The top layer will be rotated now. See, this is not programmed, this is learned. So the model actually learned how to do it before it went ahead and started turning it. So the what to turn part has already been cracked. There are a bunch of algorithms. Even the best Rubik's Cube solvers use those algorithms. But how do you make a robotic hand do it with the dexterity of a human being is where the challenge lies. Right. So this is one, beautiful example that I wanted to share with you. The next thing, this is a lot of details about how the simulation worked, how the actions are figured out, how the angles are worked out, how the movements happen. All right, so this is what I want to leave you with. Bhumik G has asked about finding data. No, Madhuri has asked for data. So here is a bunch of 18 places where you can get a lot of data. There are Google public sets and AWS public data sets, which are huge. They have anonymized a lot of it, so there is no issues with privacy or any of the aspects. You can happily use this information. I don't know how many of you have already seen these data sources. Kaggle is probably what most of you must have heard. Kaggle data is obviously, it has a very clear project title, and you have a very clear problem sets that you want to figure out. But AWS public data sets, Google public data sets, if you want information in terms of static information that doesn't change, World Bank has a lot of data that you can use. Indian government data has just started. They are trying to, they have a mission of putting a lot of this data online for Indian specific AI use cases and data science use cases. So that's another brilliant place where you can capture data, you can write to them, they do respond, and you can start working your projects and make it very Indianized instead of using foreign data sources or global data sources. If you want to create India specific problem, if you want to create India specific AI use cases, I would strongly suggest you try out the Indian government data. And I have on the right a bunch of YouTube channels that you should check out. Most of them are data science / AI. One of my favorite is 3 Blue 1 Brown, which is at the bottom of the first list. Right, he talks about a lot of these algorithms in a very intuitive way. You don't have to go through the math. While he explains the math, he does it in a very intuitive way for anybody to pick up. So that would go very well with what you are doing. I am not sure if you are how many of you listen to podcasts, but there is a podcast by Lex Friedman, which is considered to be the top podcast in the world when it comes to AI. He interviews people like Elon Musk and the head of Alexa, and the top-notch people when it comes to artificial intelligence. He is himself a AI professor at MIT. If you have chance, and if some of you are on Twitter, you should follow him. There are a lot of insightful things that he keeps giving out. There is a question from Bhumik that I missed out. Not just facial recognition, but how do we identify humans as a whole? I mean, for driverless cars, how do we identify the pedestrians? Are there any algorithms, tools, APIs, open source library available to work on this use case? So it's not identifying a human being is actually an easier use case than facial recognition. There are libraries, I can share them with you. I don't remember it on the top of my head, but you have APIs and open sources that figure out whether a human being is walking, how, the dimensions of that human being, how tall he is. And more importantly, when it comes to driverless cars, it is the distance from the car to the person. So that's another important aspect, right? You want to figure out how far it is. While it requires 2 cameras to figure that information out, if you have that data, how do you have are there APIs and are there libraries to do it? There definitely are. I hope I answered your question, Bhumik. So yeah, that's pretty much it from my side. I didn't go into the nitty-gritties of robot hand, because it is the highest, that's the most extreme use case that we have. Once you figure that out, you would figure out almost everything there. Madhuri ji, sir, can you suggest some more tutorials to work more on machine learning, etc.? Some more tutorials. Okay. So on machine learning and data science, there is only one person who is, the best person to talk about data science and machine learning. It's the on Coursera, there is this famous Andrew Ng person. He's a professor himself. He's the founder of Coursera, and he has this amazing data science course. You can pick that up. It's a full-fledged course for almost, I think it takes about 3 months of hard work and heavy tutorials to master that course. I would recommend that to be a first starting point for anybody who's very interested in getting into research level, or you want to pick this up professionally. His name is Andrew Ng, ANDREWNG. Any questions from anyone?
So any questions? Please, participants, unmute yourself and can ask.
Any feedback? Because this is the last session, you want to say something, how you felt through the 3 days, what you felt was missing, what was exciting?
I request any of the participant can you like to share the feedback about this 3 days? Please, please share.
Yes, this is Bhaskaran, and I would like to thank Yashwant for the wonderful session. And I mean, it was very detailed, and he went into a lot of things, and especially knowledge graph and those things. I was not aware before that, and I didn't know about it. And I think it gave me a lot of awareness into a lot of new things, and it was wonderful. And he explained all the questions patiently, and also thanks to the other participant. I mean, I don't remember her name, and also today the founder, right? He also gave a good overview about the use cases, and I mean, they provided the information about how it was used. So on the whole, I think it was a very good FDP, and I'm very fortunate and glad that I registered for it. Thank you, Ashwin. Thanks a lot. And thanks also to other organizers for conducting this meeting, for conducting this FDP, and giving us an opportunity to learn new things. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. I'm seeing a lot of good feedback on the chat window as well. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Madhuri Garu, Sneha Garu, Kalyan sir, everyone for your good feedback. Thanks a lot.
Anyone still participant can give the feedback. Unmute yourself. Can please give me the feedback. Bhumik. So Bhumik is he's an alumni student of our college. Now he's working in France.
I think a lot of I want to really appreciate Anji Garu and the whole team of Lendi for organizing this at such a in a very clean and smooth process. I didn't have any issues in getting information or getting onto the platform. It was very smooth, and the first day's feedback, whatever he has sent me, that also helped me to tune the second and the third days more effectively. It was amazing feedback from all of you, but some of them felt that it can be a little more technical. So we've tried to bring in the technical aspect also into it. So more details and an end-to-end project was discussed, even though it was not part of the original plan. We thought, given the feedback, it would make more sense to them. So yeah, I think it's great. Thank you, Lendi College. Um, Thank you, Anji Garu. Thank you, the entire team of Lendi, for giving this opportunity to Advisely. And thanks everyone, Bhaskaran sir, Karthik ji, who are all the people who asked fantastic questions. It really showed that uh, the kind of interest that you're showing, and you're actually understanding and following what I was saying. I remember this question on knowledge graph that Bhaskaran ji has asked yesterday on, if you are already connected to internet, then why do you need a knowledge graph at all, right? For many of the people, when I take these sessions, it takes them a while to figure out there is, that you can actually, that there is something different there between a knowledge graph and the internet. And he kind of picked it up in a very short time, and I was really surprised, saying that, wow, okay. uh, he's actually got onto the right question at such a short period of time.
Yes, sir. Yes.
So it's amazing. Thank you everyone.
So, sir, one more good thing I would like to share.
Yes.
So the participants, the number of participants in the first day, the 101, and the second day is also 101, and third day about 110 participants has been joined and they listened this FDP set.
Fantastic.
So
Fantastic.
a great thing to listen, because if you take the online workshops day by day, the number of candidates will be decrease. So
That's right. Yes.
FDP really went on very good way. So you have shared, your team will shared such a good knowledge to whoever participated here. I felt very happy, and I got a lot of information because I am doing the research in this machine learning and deep learning in healthcare industry. Uh, so very thank you people, sir, YS Rao Garu and yourself, and Prahalya, for accepting our invitation and spending this much of time with us. Once again, I thank you people, sir. Once again, I thank our coordinators, conveners. First of all, I would like to thank our management, the principal, dean training and placement, our training and placement coordinators. So whoever supporting this FDP directly or indirectly, everyone, each one of them, uh, I thank very much. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I want to close the session by thanking all the participants. I think it was a very high standard participants, one of the best set of audience that I have come across when I'm talking about
Across
these
India, sir. That's yes, sir.
Yeah, I think a great kudos, and personally I thank all of them for coming and making the time for this. Amazing. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you. So I request the participants, whoever not fill the feedback form, you can fill the feedback form. Within the days, within 2 or 3 days, we will share the e-certificate to your registered email. If and all, if any participant not receive the certificate, kindly contact me. We will provide the certificate. Gopi, can we leave?
Yes, sir.
I think can we wait for 5 minutes for
Yes, sir. I will be waiting for 5 to 6 minutes and then I will be closing the sessions.
Okay. So